Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. And on behalf of the foundation, welcome to the Richard Milhous Nixon Library, Birthplace, and Burial Site. Quite a mouthful, that is. I am former Congressman John Campbell, who for 10 years represented an area just a little bit to the west and the south of here in Congress, and retired just about 15 months ago. I got to know Dr. Rand Paul, and I will at least at first call him that, through his father, then Congressman Ron Paul, who Thursdays at lunch at noon would have a group of us, like-minded individuals, who met in his office for a rather, I will say, sparse and low-budget lunch, which is in keeping, I think, but certainly there was food there, and we would meet there and have usually speakers who would come and talk to those of us who believed that the paramount function of government is to ensure the liberty of the people. Senator Paul joined those meetings when he could make the long trek over from the Senate now and then. A couple of things I will say about Senator Paul. There are two types of people I found in Washington. There are those who are career politicians, and there are those who had a life before they came to Washington, D.C. Senator Paul is one of the latter, and we want more of the latter. Because when you have experienced life as Senator Paul has, not just outside of D.C., but as a very successful doctor and ophthalmologist, you have a perspective on things that you don't get when you've lived your life entirely within the confines of government. And it does another thing for you. It enables you to take positions and be bold and be strong, because you know that if for some reason you lost this job, you have a life after this job. And that your self-worth, your self-image is not made up by that title, congressman or senator. It's made up by a much deeper set of character traits that makes up you. And that certainly is Dr. Rand Paul. The other thing I will say is there are another two types of people in Washington. There are those who operate on principle and those who operate on expediency. We need more of the former, which is again what Dr. Rand Paul is. An individual who stands on principle, but let me say this, there are many people back there who stand on principle, but not all of them are as respected as this man is. And both sides of the aisle, all across, they respect him because they know what he is doing is not out of personal ambition, but it's out of what he believes very strongly to his core is right. And they also know that he will be consistent, and that when he takes a position on something, there will be a consistency, and you will know and understand why he is there, what he is standing for, and the importance of that thing. Ladies and gentlemen, we are here in California, but we should all be extremely thankful to the people of Kentucky that they have given us and hopefully will continue to give us Senator Rand Paul. I introduce to you the senator from Kentucky.
Let freedom ring. Let the white dove sing. Let the whole world know that today is a day of reckoning. Let the weak be strong.
Thank you. Now, this is not exactly how I pictured my first speech from the East Room. 2 years ago, when I got started on the odyssey that became probably one of the most extraordinary presidential elections, I never could have imagined in my wildest dreams the way it would have turned out. I think at the time, no one thought that the current leader was even serious about the contest. But we are where we are, When I think about being here at the Nixon Library, I think I don't have any anecdotes I can tell you about Nixon. I was 11 years old. But I do remember at the time, and many of you will, if you're my age or older, will remember the pictures of the helicopters. I'm reminded of that, taking off the embassy in Saigon and the end of the war. I do remember Nixon giving speeches on television. I have to tell you, at 11, they were a little long and a little bit dry. But I remember him sitting there because it would, there were 3 channels and it would be dominated by the president's speech, and they would be written out and done verbatim for the most part. But I got lucky enough when I was in Washington to become associated with a group called the Nixon Policy Center. It actually has another name. It's now called the Center for National Interest. And what they represent is a foreign policy think tank, or an arena for foreign policy issues that is has the understanding, basically, that maybe we shouldn't intervene all the time, everywhere, that maybe we don't always know what's best, that maybe there are unintended consequences to us thinking that we can be all things to all people. So to me, it's a forum for common sense. You don't hear much of it in Congress, but the Center for National Interest actually has that. I was at one of the speeches not too long ago I got to give to them, and Kissinger was actually on the podium. I remember him from when I was a kid, and I remember having difficulty following his speeches when I was 11, and I still have a little bit of difficulty, but he's a smart guy. And so I was there, and I was trying to think, what is the thing that I can talk about that I might be related somehow or can relate personally to with Nixon? And what I thought about is that when I was a kid, we had a guy that was a friend of our family, and we called him Captain Pete. His name was Pete Karpenko, and he came from the Ukraine, and he actually fought in the Tsar's army. I don't know how old you have to be to fight in the Tsar's army, like against the Bolsheviks in 1917. I knew him in the early 70s, so he was probably in his 80s, and I think he had fought when he was like 12 or 14 years old. This is a guy who had lived and seen the consequences of socialism and communism, seen it up close, seen it firsthand. And in those days, in the early 70s, most of the hardcore conservatives, and that was what our family was at that time. You probably wouldn't have called us libertarian at the time. You would have called us hardcore conservatives, anti-communist, like the hardcore right wing of the party. And we were, I'd say my dad and myself following along, we were thinking, well, we shouldn't recognize Red China. We shouldn't trade with Red China. That's like giving gifts to the communists. However, it's one of the things that I changed my opinion on over time, and I think so did my father. The idea that basically when you trade with people, you're less likely to fight with them. And there's a quote that George W. Bush put forward that I kind of like, and he said that trade sort of begins the habits of freedom, but trade also creates the expectations of democracy. And I think that's kind of the way we could describe our relationship with China. Are they free and democratic? Do they have free political expression? No. But is it better than it was under Mao? Is it better that we not be, right at each other waiting for nuclear war with China? So in the end, I think Nixon was right to open trade with Red China, and that trade is a good thing. Is it always to our advantage? I don't know. We're having that debate in our country right now. We started out with many of the presidential candidates being for trade, and now they've all switched to being against trade. Hillary Clinton negotiated the trade treaty. She was once for it before she was against it. Cruz was for it before he was against it. Trump, I think, was never for it. But when we analyze things like trade and we want to ask ourselves, is it a good thing or a bad thing? You have to add up the numbers, and you have to look at it. And part of the problem with trade is there is what is seen and there is what is unseen. Bastiat was a philosopher and a French parliamentarian back in the 1850s, and he talked about the seen and the unseen. It's very easy to see when government collects all of your money and builds a big 10-story tall building. You can say, look at this brand new building the government built. That is the seen. The unseen is the dollar they took from each one of you. It came out of the economy, and it's harder to see the deleterious effects of when the government takes money from you in small increments because you can see the bright, shiny building. Same with trade. With trade, we see, and what's very visible sometimes, are the loss of jobs. In Ashland, Kentucky, we lost 600 jobs this year in a steel industry that's been there since 1903. You can see that, you can feel that, you can meet them, you can meet the people who are out of work. But at the same time, if you add up the numbers, it looks like we're a farming state. We'll gain $2 billion worth of new trade by opening up markets. We also distill bourbon. If you need bourbon, we have plenty for you. And they look to new markets in Asia by lowering tariffs. The average shopper saves about $800 in Walmart every year, but you save it a nickel and a dime and a penny and $1 at a time. But that $800 for the average consumer at the end of the year is $800 more that you can spend. I haven't looked at the numbers in California, but in all reality, probably trade is good for California. Right on the edge of our country, I'm sure you have an enormous trade across the Pacific. But it's difficult because you see somebody who loses a job in an existing older industry, but you may not see what's being gained by trade on the other side. But I think Nixon was prophetic in opening the door to having a more integrated world. And whether you have a positive or negative opinion of the trade agreements, I think there's something to be said for we are less likely to fight with people we trade with. War is a devastating and terrible thing. I love the quote from Eisenhower. He says, "I hate war like only a soldier who's experienced. I hate war because of the futility, the stupidity, the banality of war." Eisenhower knew that, and there was a time in which we had many people in our government who had served in the military, and you know who the people most circumspect, the people less likely to take us to war, are people who've actually served and seen it up close. We've lost some of that. And I think as a consequence, we do have sometimes maybe a little bit too much of an eagerness or a lack of reticence with we're getting into war. I think we saw that a little bit in the presidential debate. I tried to point out that we need to look at the world as it is, not in some sort of Alice in Wonderland, this is the perfect world we want, and you know, if we just topple Gaddafi, maybe they'll elect Thomas Jefferson. It doesn't seem to be working out that way. We need to look at the world as it is and determine whether or not, as physicians would say, first we do no harm. Are we going to make things worse? If you look backwards in time, have we made things better or worse? I think Libya, without question, is worse. Is it more chaotic or less chaotic? It's more chaotic since Gaddafi's gone. Is the region more stable or less stable? No question it's less stable. Are we more threatened by people who would organize and be terrorists to attack us now or under Gaddafi? A third of Libya now pledges allegiance to ISIS. We're back in there bombing targets in Libya, and there's a completely failed state in Libya. But it's not just Libya. The story of Libya is also the story of Syria. One of the most alarming, or I guess one of the most revealing stories I saw recently was a story about a city called Marea, M-A-R-E-A. It's near Azaz, just north of Aleppo in Syria. They are battling for Marea right now, and you know who the two groups are? Kurdish troops supported by the Pentagon and some righteous brothers of jihad supported by the CIA. They are battling for a city in Syria, and we are supporting both sides of a battle. There are people in the Senate, I won't mention any names, but John McCain, who want to bomb both sides of the war. They want to bomb ISIS, but they also want to bomb Assad at the same time. There are 2 million Christians in Syria, more Christians in Syria than any other country other than Egypt. Who protects them? Assad. To a person, if they were here and we asked them, who would you be for, Assad or anybody on the other side? They would pick Assad. Does that make Assad a great guy? No, he's probably an evil despot. He probably used chemical weapons on his own people. And yet, is he better than the 1,500 Islamic groups on the other side that, just would as soon would see a Christian's head on a pike as on a body? They fear what happens if Assad is gone. But it goes back even further. We go back to the Iraq War. Are we better off with Hussein gone? Was Hussein a good guy? Absolutely not. but the region is still suffering the chaos of removing Assad. We say, well, why can't we, replace dictators with democracy? It happened here. We got rid of the king and we got a democratic government. Well, you know what? We had an extraordinary experience in our country. Why? Extraordinary because we didn't really throw off all of what was with us. We threw off the king, we threw off the yoke of the king, but we kept a lot of traditions. We kept the tradition of elected government. A lot of people don't realize this, but we had elective government. The House of Burgess started meeting in the 1630s, 1640s. So by the time you get to the American Revolution, we'd had over 100 years of elective government. None of it stopped. Even throughout the war, we kept our elective government. We had the common law. Many of the restraints on the king and the government began with the Magna Carta on the plains of Runnymede in 1215. We didn't give up on all of that. We kept all of those English traditions. We kept our religion. Most of us were bound by our religion. When Washington says that democracy requires a virtuous people, part of what allowed us to thrive and continue on and not drop into chaos was this religious backbone. But you compare and contrast that with other times in history. Compare and contrast that with the French Revolution. French Revolution, they threw off the king, but the king was their religion. The religion was the state religion, and they had nothing. And they wound up in a very chaotic situation until they finally got another strong man. Look at the Middle East. Is there a strong history of democracy in the Middle East? I'm aware of almost none. And so when we say we're going to be and we're going to try to help them find freedom, perhaps what we help them find is another form of authoritarianism or of various forms of despotism. So we have to think before we act. When we were on the stage and everybody was like, every other Republican candidate and all the Democrat candidates were saying, we need to have a no-fly zone over there. It's like, do you not realize Russia's already there? Russia's already flying, so what you're saying is you're going to shoot down Russian planes. Christie's standing right next to me, and he says, damn right, I'll be the first one to shoot down the Russian planes. Really? I mean, is that the level of seriousness that we're going to treat who's going to be in charge of our nuclear weapons? The businessman from New York, what's his name? He was asked about the nuclear triad, and he had no freaking idea what it was. And it's not complicated. It's that we can deliver missiles by air, by land, and by sea. That's a nuclear triad. To make things worse, he had been asked the same question about a month before by Hugh Hewitt. He was asked the exact same question and still had no idea. But to make up for it, his campaign a week later responded in this way. They said, well, yeah, we have a nuclear triad, but our biggest problem is we have been unwilling to use it. We have other candidates that say the answer to the Middle East is we're going to make the sand glow. We're going to do carpet bombing of the Middle East. Really? That's somehow going to make things better? Trump said that's right, that's Trump. He said he's going to kill the families of the terrorists. Really? You're going to line up little kids and shoot them in the head? We are better than that. He says, waterboarding is just the beginning. Yeah, we'll waterboard them, we'll do everything. It's like, that's not who we are. If we give up who we are as a people, have we really given up? Have we really won, or have they won? I met one of the policemen after the Boston bombing, and I liked the way he put this. He was there, he was running through the streets, the emotion, and he was angry. I'd be angry too. I still am angry at someone who would kill women and children. Just indiscriminately to bomb civilians as if that somehow was going to further a religious ideal. But he said when we caught the second brother, they caught the one that was alive, the one hiding under the boat, he said that he was proud to be an American because we didn't beat him to death with tire irons. He's going to get a day in court. He's going to get a trial. Is he guilty as hell? Yes. Does he deserve to be punished? Yes. But we didn't resort to mob violence. One of the things that I've been fighting for 5 years now is that it is on our books that an American citizen can be indefinitely detained. And you say, it's just going to be the Muslims. Well, who's next? The Jews. How about the Hispanics? How about the people with brown skin? How about the gays? How about anybody that's not popular? We have the protections of the Bill of Rights because they are to protect the least popular among us. The Bill of Rights isn't for the high school quarterback. The Bill of Rights is not for the prom queen, although it is. But it's really for those who aren't popular. The Bill of Rights is so you get justice, so you get your day in court. When President Obama signed the law that says that we can detain an American citizen without a trial, he said, "Yes, but I am a good man and I will not use it." That's not what the law is about. The law is about expecting that you'll get the worst people in office. As John can tell you, often do get the worst people in office. You want the laws to bind people. The goal of the Constitution was, as Jefferson said, to be the chains that bind government, that restrict and restrain government. That's my concern, is that you have a law in the books that says we can indefinitely detain an American citizen without a trial. We did that to the Japanese. You remember the incarceration of the Japanese, the internment that we did out here. So there have been times we have made mistakes. It's not impossible to imagine that a government can make wholesale mistakes on what you look like, or where you came from, or who your parents are. We went through an episode where we now have bulk collection of all of your phone records. And you say, what's the deal? It's just a bunch of numbers and metadata and how long I'm on the phone. Through metadata, a couple Stanford students put an app on a phone, and they found that they can tell 85% of the time what your religion is. They can tell 100% of the time who your doctors are. They can tell the vast majority of the time what your medicines are by metadata. One former head of the NSA said, "We kill people based on metadata." My guess is that metadata can tell quite a bit about us, and that we need to be very careful about allowing that to happen. I was in a meeting a couple of weeks ago, and FBI Director Comey was there. James Clapper was there. And they were like acting all upset, and it's all Snowden's fault, and everybody's encrypting all of their information. The default position is now encryption. And I was like, guys, this isn't a reaction to Snowden. It's a reaction to you. It's a reaction to you lying to the American public and saying we're not doing this. It's a reaction to the entire world saying they don't even want American products. Do you know that we've lost billions of dollars because anybody who can buy somebody else's stuff is buying somebody else's stuff because they think everything made in America has been invaded by the NSA. So I told them to look in the mirror. They weren't very happy with me. They're lobbying. The FBI director in public is lobbying for this new Feinstein and Burr bill, which says that you must comply with a warrant. And that sounds like, well, that's pretty benign, right? If you have probable cause and a judge writes a warrant, sure, you should comply. But you know what they mean by that one word, must? What they mean is that it's not you giving up information. They want to be able to tell Apple or any other company that you have to create something that doesn't exist. Apple purposely devised your phone so only you can get access to it. Apple has no secret code to get onto your phone. And yet they want them to have to create something that doesn't exist. And they want special little back doors to get into your information, to get beyond encryption. And yet, if you open these back doors, who else uses them? Crooks, the people trying to steal your information, terrorists, foreign governments. What do you think happens to dissent in China if the Chinese government can get in everybody's phones? We have to look, frankly, at a different way. When I began my campaign, I said that we needed a bigger, better, bolder party. I told people, frankly, that the GOP brand, and I promised the chairman I would quit saying this, but I don't think he has any control over me anymore. The GOP brand sucks. And I don't say that to glorify in it. I say that because it's broken. You talk to kids on campus, they'll join a libertarian group, they'll join a liberty group. They don't want to be part of the Republican group. We have to make it cool again to be in a Republican group. We got to make it acceptable for young people to want to be Republicans. To be a bigger, better, bolder party, we've got to be a party that becomes more diverse. If we think we're going to win by being the white man's party, we're not going to win that. I said that from the very beginning. We cannot win unless we have more Hispanics in our party, more Asians in our party, more African Americans in our party. So I began my campaign by going to Howard. I even went to Berkeley. I lived to tell about it. I went to Ferguson. I went to the south side of Chicago, not changing the message, but saying, look, we are the messengers of, and we are the party of civil rights. We are the party of equal protection under the law. We are the party of emancipation. Whatever happened, how do people forget about that? And all the libertarian things that we're for, the idea that you cannot be detained without a trial, who do you think that's protecting? That's protecting minorities. We are the defender of minority rights. We have every reason we could expand our party and go above and beyond where we've ever been. But we can't be the party that characterizes everybody that wants to immigrate to the United States as being a drug dealer or a rapist. People come to our country, and I'm not for no rules. I am for rules at the border. You got to have rules. I'm not for open borders. But I also see most people who are dying to get to our country want to come here for freedom and prosperity. And we have to understand that. And it isn't about policy. I guarantee if I was talking to 1,000 Latinos, 1,000 Hispanics, and I told them, look, I'm for rules at the border, but I think people want to come here because it's a great country, and I don't look down upon you because you want to come to our country. You know what? I think many of them are open to that message. It isn't even about the policy, it's about the attitude. If people think you don't like them, they're not going to like you back. They're not going to be a part of your party if they think you don't like them. That's our problem. We are seen as the party that doesn't appear to be receptive to new people, doesn't appear to care about people who live in poverty. 3 out of 4 people in prison are black or brown for nonviolent drug use. And yet if you look at surveys, white kids are using drugs just as much. And you say, well, why is that? Why is that happening? Are the police all racist? No, it isn't that. That's a dumb, stupid leftist argument to say it's the police's fault. But what is happening is the police just don't go to the suburbs. There's not much crime out there. So white kids get away with stuff, black kids don't. There is more crime in the city. Where do the police go? Where the crime is. But day after day after day, it adds up. And our prisons are full of black people and brown people. If we can be the party that says we got to change that, we got to fix that. Putting people in jail for 15 years for marijuana is ridiculous. We still have thousands of people, and this is one thing that President Obama did that was good. He let some of the people out that have been in jail for crack cocaine for 15 years. White kids were using powder cocaine and getting 6 months or probation or no time at all. And the black kids were getting 15 years. Some of them were still in jail. Remember, what's the receiver for the Broncos? Demaryius Thomas? Is that right? I don't see any football fans. Nobody nodding their head. Demaryius Thomas? Everybody else asleep? His mom was commuted sentence, but she was in for 2 15-year consecutive sentences for drugs. None of this is to say that drugs are good, but you know what? If we were the party that said, you know what? People should get a second chance. Look, Christianity talks about redemption, talks about second chances. Raise your hand if you never did anything wrong when you were in high school or college. All right, two or three liars here. All right. But the thing is, maybe there are, but a lot of people did make mistakes. Last 3 presidents, I think, admitted to making mistakes when they were younger. But they got a chance, they got lucky, or they didn't get caught. So I think if we became a party that was more about having understanding where people come from, understand that there's a cycle from jail to drugs to poverty, trying to figure out a way out of it. I've introduced a plan called economic freedom zones, and I talk about a lot about this in the book. Economic freedom zones is the idea, and Jack Kemp talked about this some, the idea of lowering taxes dramatically in areas of poverty. Instead of saying, hey, let's send our money to Washington, and then we'll beg to get some back in the form of a grant, let's just never take it to begin with. It could be the equivalent amount of money, let's say it's $1 million, but it's got to be 1,000 times more effective to leave it and not bring it back. Because if I bring you $1 million back, who do I give it to? I don't know who's good in business. Who do politicians usually give it to? Their friends, their political contributors, cronies, buddies. Maybe it shouldn't be the politician deciding. If I give it back to you in the form of lowering your taxes, what happens? Who gets more of it? those who are working harder and producing more and paying more in taxes. But you could do these targeted tax breaks in areas of poverty. I'd do it for 10 years. But then it would show that, look, we have a policy consistent with being for less taxes, but we have a policy now for what we would do for people in poverty. Let's don't lock everybody up. Let's try to leave more money in their community. Let's try to stimulate growth in the areas that have had poverty. In my state, Appalachia has had poverty for 40 years. South side of Chicago has been struggling probably as long. We could fix some of these problems. We could also maybe win some elections by showing that we're not just the party of wealthy. We're not just the party of the white folk. So I think there's a lot we can do. The book's about a bigger, better, bolder future for us. And I appreciate very much you coming out today, and I hope you'll be part of that movement. Thank you very much.
Senator, thank you. Now, ladies and gentlemen, he has offered to take a couple of questions. And that's what we're going to do right now. And afterwards, I want you all to know that he'll be available to autograph books up in our front lobby. They are for sale in the museum store and down the colonnade upon your exit. Our first question is from Alex Barola, who is a resident of Fullerton. Alex.
Thank you, Senator, for coming to speak to us. You've spoken about creating this new Republican Party, and my question is, with so many office holders throughout the country, Republicans, including here in Orange County, they seem so invested in big government. They vote for surveillance, they vote for interventionism, they support all these kinds of policies that, you know, don't really fly with us libertarian-leaning Republicans. How do we fight against that at the grassroots level and the national level to actually affect those kind of changes in the party and ultimately in public policy?
You know, I think within the party there are different caucuses and groups. I met somebody here from Campaign for Liberty, which was a group my dad started. Republican Liberty Caucus is a more libertarian-leaning group. So I would look for groups within the party. And I also think that we need to have more youth-oriented young people after work, kind of going to meet at different locations. So I think there are a lot of ways you can. Also, I think getting involved in primaries. 20% of people vote in a primary, very small number, and probably 1 in 1,000 people volunteer and help in a primary. So if it's a state rep seat and you like one candidate more than the other, and you go knock on 200 doors for somebody, you've had a disproportionate effect. If you've got money, give them money, but if you don't have money and you will work for people, that work is very, very valuable to different candidates. The other thing I would do is, I pretty much say I will support, Republican nominee or whoever, but I will probably spend more work and time on the people who I really like, that I really think are representing the ideas of liberty and the direction I want the party to take. So it doesn't mean you have to oppose everybody in your party, and I try to get along with everybody, but I will spend my time, my energy, and my money going and working for people who I think will change the system. The system is so broken that I would tell you in Washington, the loudest voices for raising spending are Republican. Now, they want it for the military, but in order to get it, they have to give the Democrats domestic spending. So we raise military and domestic. In 2013, there was something called the sequester in 2011. Sequester was a slowdown in the rate of growth of spending, but it was still growing. But the right complained and complained and complained that we weren't getting enough military money, and so they said, we'll make any deal. So Paul Ryan made a deal with Patty Murray, and we raised the spending in 2013, $100 billion. We did it again in 2015. Both sides getting together to raise spending. And you may say, well, we've got to have spending for national defense. I agree. I think national defense is the #1 thing we should do in Washington. Members of my family in the military, I want them protected. I want them to have the best equipment. But we spend $600 billion on the military. How much is enough? We spend more than Russia plus China plus the next 10 countries. How much is enough? In the military, do you know that the green theology has infected the military? Everywhere you go, they're like, oh, look at these solar panels we have, or, oh, we just built a $43 million natural gas station in Afghanistan. We spent $113 billion on infrastructure in Afghanistan. So we've got to rethink kind of what we're doing. And I think there is a new way, but I think particularly in California, because y'all are beaten up and bruised and abused, and I'm trying to remember, y'all haven't won very often. I mean, for president, I don't know, it might have been Nixon last time y'all went for it. No, it was Reagan, I guess. But it's been a long time. So the Republican Party needs to reinvent itself here. And this isn't a criticism of Republican leaders. I've met many of them are good people. But you got to reinvent and somehow begin attracting young people. And that's why my hope was when I started the campaign that we'd invigorate and bring young people in as libertarian Republicans. And that means we may not all agree on every issue. I think primarily the economic issues bring us together and some of the other issues divide us. But maybe the economic issues of low taxes, balanced budgets, and less regulation, that capitalism is a great economic system, that we want to leave more money in the private sector, we could agree on that. Maybe we're not going to agree on every other issue after that, but try to bring people in through that message. I still think that's possible.
Next question to your left, Senator.
Thank you, Senator. My name is Tony Mazeka from Mission Viejo. Thanks for visiting friendly Orange County. Well, first of all, there is a lot of debate going on right now with regards to NATO. And I totally agree with the need for us expanding our trade throughout the world globally. But what I am concerned about is without alliances that we have created, we will lose out and become very vulnerable to the things that we talked about before in terms of potential war, especially when we have people like Putin breathing down our necks.
Right. No, I think alliances are important, but it can kind of cut both ways sometimes, in the sense that we have to decide, when we've gone so far in an alliance that we actually provoke a reaction from the other side. So, for example, many people wanted to put Georgia, the nation of Georgia, into NATO. Well, for those of you who know geography, Georgia sits right on the edge of Russia and was part of Russia. So it sits right over there. If you put them in NATO, is that good that we now can protect Georgia? Or is it so much that we've now provoked them into an altercation over a country that is pretty foreign to us and pretty distant from us? Same question with Ukraine. Should they go into NATO? But then it's a different question of whether or not the NATO nucleus that we had from after World War II on, whether that can be a bulwark against Russian expansionism, and I think was, after the war. So, no, I think alliances are important. I think that that we don't have to say to ourselves that we have to be completely quiet about telling them they need to spend more. I think they do. They don't spend enough, and it's not just Trump saying that. A lot of people have been saying NATO allies need to spend more on their defense. But I don't think to me, it's not a carte blanche thing that we shouldn't have alliances. But I do worry about spreading the alliances to all the old Soviet satellites in the sense that it may drag us into something over there. I think Putin, while he's become more popular, we still completely dominate them militarily as far as on a global scheme of superpowers. And I think that part of his sort of pugnacious invading surrounding Crimea, as well as Ukraine, is to detract or distract from his poor economy at home. There's always the chance, I think he's always day to day, whether or not he could have an upheaval because people are unhappy, with not enough to eat. Anybody else?
This is Joe Blanding from Fullerton.
Hello, Senator. Passionate supporter, both you and your dad, and we're going to have an election here on June 7th, and I really, really wish you were still in it, but unfortunately you're not. And where I'm torn is it seems like Ted Cruz overall is better on, taxes and economic issues and the Fed, but listening to Donald Trump's speech last week, he kind of appears to be better on foreign policy in general. And that's just kind of where, as a longtime supporter, campaign for liberty, everything, where I'm torn.
Sorry, no help here. I've just decided to stay out of the endorsement part. Part of it is that I think if I endorse a candidate, from the two remaining or possibly three remaining, that I sort of become de facto their surrogate and have to explain everything they're for. And you're right. Cruz is probably very good on economic issues and probably would be one of the most conservative / libertarian / free market people we've had. I think he would be good on economic issues. I'm concerned about making the sand glow in the Middle East being a strategy for foreign policy. Trump has said some things that sound, he recognizes the Iraq War was a mistake. So I think some of the things Trump has said is good, but Trump, I think, is unmoored from philosophy or anything. And so I have no idea whether what he's telling us 1 minute is really what he believes the next minute, And I don't think there's a limited government tradition or bone in his body. So he might be a conservative, but he spent 66 of his 69 years being a progressive Democrat. So, I don't know. But occasionally I'll hear his foreign policy pronouncements say, wow, yeah, I think some of what he's saying is good, that we do need to be more circumspect of our interventions overseas. But he's also talked about ramping up by sending more soldiers in with ISIS as well. I think there is a way to defeat ISIS, but part of it gets back to the idea of realism in the sense that Soviets have had a military base in Syria for 50 years. If we start with the strategy, we're going to kick Soviet Union out of Syria and out of the Middle East, I don't think we're getting anywhere. But if we start with the strategy that Putin is an aggressor, he is kind of a bully, he will do things that we don't like, but at the same time he's in a region sometimes with the same self-interest, that we might be able to find points of self-interest where we use that to try to find a solution. ISIS is done for if Syria could be stable. They're completely surrounded. There's 190,000 troops in Baghdad. There's 190,000 troops in the Peshmerga. The Turks have 600,000. The Jordanians have a couple 100,000. The Israelis have over 1 million. They're completely surrounded, but this chaotic situation where they can go back into havens is a problem. So you have to figure out some kind of settlement in Syria. And I don't see that answer coming from anybody, and that's another reason why I kind of want to keep my voice distinctive, but keep calling for, some sort of rational process to getting to peace and eradicating ISIS.
Next question.
Thank you, Senator. My name is Andy Whalen. I'm from Long Beach. I'm the Republican candidate trying to unseat Alan Lowenthal. And the question I have is, Puerto Rico is heading towards bankruptcy. Do you see this as an opportunity to take your idea of economic freedom zones and put it on steroids and create a sort of Hong Kong in the Caribbean?
Well, if bankruptcy is not always a terrible thing. I mean, if you go through bankruptcy and you change and alter everything. So if I'm a venture capitalist and you have a company out here in Los Angeles that's millions of dollars in debt, we can wipe the debt out and I come in, and unfortunately I have to lay off half of the workforce to make it profitable. If I have union contracts, I might have to renegotiate them. If you get new management with new ideas and you dramatically change things, sometimes it's good. The other problem, though, is you also have the rule of law with Puerto Rico. People bought their debt given the rules, and the rules are written into the Constitution. I think, frankly, and I'm not sure Congress really needs to do this, because if they quit paying on their debt, don't you think the creditors go to court and something figures out and they'll figure out a way of doing it? But your idea of making making Puerto Rico Hong Kong is a great idea. If we could figure out how to do that, and that means opening borders for trade. Some of the people have also argued that they made their minimum wage too high, which you need to hear about in California, because it's having a big heart and a small brain problem.
Our next question is from Charlotte Samhills from Anaheim.
Samuels. Hi, thank you so much for being here. I have a really quick question. So I know that you're opposed to the bulk collection of metadata, and you mentioned that a lot of people are now encrypting. What can Americans do to oppose the bulk collection of metadata other than encryption?
Well, I think encryption has occurred, and it's a genie out of the box, and people are going to continue to use encryption. If we ban it in our country, also the business will just go to Asia or somewhere else, and they'll use other applications they can use overseas. As far as opposing politically, I think it's a political question of who represents you. And it's not like one of these things where I lay awake at night thinking that the government's rummaging through all my records. I really do think most of them are good people. It's kind of like the question, I play golf with an FBI agent. Do I think the FBI is evil or bad? No, I think they're mostly good. Probably like the rest of you. Probably 98% of you are good, and I'm not sure which the 2% are, but there's a few of you out there that aren't good. But same way with government or FBI or anything, it's that, but you have to have a watchdog, and you separate the powers. You separate the police power and the judicial power because it's a check and balance. And what you're trying to separate is so the policeman who is a bigot, who would use his own personal force to go after people he doesn't like, is checked and balanced by a judiciary. And it's the same way with the bulk collection. We've got to have checks and balances of it, and our founding fathers were very, very adamant on this. In fact, we didn't fight the revolution for the Second Amendment. Nobody ever thought they'd take our guns back then. They weren't in California, apparently, but the Fourth Amendment's really what they fought it over. They were concerned about the British soldiers coming in their house to enforce the Stamp Act without warrants. And they're also concerned about generalized warrants. This was a big, it's hard for us to fathom how big ideas and issues were back in those days. But the idea of a generalized warrant was an anathema, and it was a big deal. And John Adams at one point says that when James Otis was opposing the generalized warrants or the writs of assistance, that was the spark that led to the revolution. It was also a big deal overseas as well. In England, there were famous cases being fought over generalized warrants. But I think the way you fight is politically. If you have sensitive communications, either personal or business, there are all kinds of applications you can put it on. Part of the idea we have to overcome, though, is there are certain people that believe if you have nothing to hide, you have nothing to fear. My response to those people is that's a far cry lower than innocent until proven guilty. So, I think everybody needs privacy. Even religious people are going to eventually need privacy because there's going to come a day that the politically correct decide to come to you in your house or in your church and say you can't believe certain things either. And that day is not too far off.
Senator, I know you have a very packed schedule. We will take one more question. I want to remind everyone that he is going to be available in the front lobby to sign books. They are available down in the museum store and on the exit. Our last question.
Hi there, Senator. Thank you so much for coming to the Nixon Library. We really appreciate it. My question is, I notice a lot of people in my generation, as they grow older, they kind of come to their political consciousness around college. And I feel like for the last 10, 15 years, as you've noted, they see the Republican brand as very damaged. And I think the result of that is a lot of folks in my generation now voting or campaigning for an open socialist for the presidency, which is absolutely incredible in a historical context. So my question is, how do you take voters who are passionate about somebody running for office as a socialist and convert them to the Republican brand, especially presidential elections down the line and into the future?
I think it's tough, but I think a lot of young people are not fixed yet in their ways. As you said, your ideas and your opinions change over time. There was the saying, I forget who said it, that if you're not a liberal before 30, you don't have a heart. If you're not a conservative after 30, you don't have a brain. But I do think that if we're trying to approach young people, so I went and talked at Berkeley. I didn't talk about balanced budgets. I didn't talk about regulations or taxes. I talked about personal freedom, privacy, and the government not collecting your information without an individualized warrant, and I was received pretty well. So I think you have to know your audience. Young people don't have any money. They've got some of their parents maybe, but they don't have any money, and so they don't really care about regulations, taxes, things, over-regulation, overzealous regulators. They don't care about that. But they do care about personal issues, personal liberty. And I think that's the one thing that we need to inform people who think socialism is no big deal. And many of them think socialism is no big deal because Bernie's for democratic socialism. So the first thing we need to inform them is that majority rule is not a good thing, and we are not a democracy. We're a constitutional republic. And but even more so, we need to inform them that socialism is the opposite of choice. So if they tell you that they're young and they believe in freedom and they believe in choice, Well, socialism is the opposite of choice. It's anti-choice. It's taking away your choice from what you want to buy, what you want to sell, who you want to interact in. It's the opposite of freedom. And most of the time when we've tried socialism in a whole-scale way, it's led to violence and death and camps. Stalin killed 63 million people. And they say, oh, it was just Stalin. That doesn't happen. But really in socialism, there's an inherent use of force that comes, or implied force that comes with everything. Because to prevent you from selling things you want to sell, they give you a ticket. If you don't pay the ticket, you continue to sell something, they put you in jail. And then ultimately, in many cultures, it's been death that comes from those who want to be free to choose. I think Milton Friedman was good at presenting this to, and it was a little more of a libertarian message, but good at presenting this to young people as well. My dad was great at it. I always told him he wasn't cool. His ideas were kind of cool, but he wasn't that cool, but young people loved him. Thanks, everybody.
Senator, thank you.